Samuel Jackson is back in the 2019 version of Shaft. Now, I didn't actually realize that was the case until a few days ago. I assumed that they had just got a new person in and Samuel Jackson was not involved at all. But when I saw a poster and found out that Samuel Jackson was back, I thought I need to check out the film. I had seen the previous Shaft of Samuel Jackson, which I think was from about 20 years ago or 19 years ago. I can't say I remember too much about it, so I don't think I hated it, but I really don't remember too much about that film. So I went into the movie with mixed expectations. I had low expectations just in general for the film. It's another Shaft film, and I knew it'd be doing very poorly in the box office so far. But at the same time, Samuel Jackson can play an excellent character, which I might call Samuel Jackson. He's really good at playing Samuel Jackson, if that's what we get here. I don't think he's a fantastic actor as such, but when he plays the kind of one character that he plays a lot, I think he's really good in that role, and that's actually what you get here. You get classic Samuel Jackson, and the film is absolutely fantastic. So I thought, what are we in for here? And I laughed all the way through it. I laughed a lot in this film. I wasn't really sure what the genre of the film would really be called to try to describe it. I mean, I wouldn't call this a comedy. I laughed a lot, but this isn't what I call a comedy. I did have a quick look on IMDb, and it describes it as an action comedy crime. So I think that's a fair description, but it's a little bit weird joining the three like that, an action comedy crime. But I just wouldn't say that this is a comedy, but I laughed a lot. It is very funny. So the bottom line for the film is if you like the classic Samuel Jackson performance, which you get in a lot of the characters he plays, basically the same character a lot of the time, you'll like this film. Okay, the film revolves around that. There are some things in the film where you might actually like even if you're not a big fan of Samuel Jackson, but I think if you're not a fan of Samuel Jackson, the film will struggle for you. That's really the main point of it. If you like Samuel Jackson, this is what you get. This is a Samuel Jackson film. If you love Samuel Jackson, you'll love this film. If you hate Samuel Jackson, you will hate this film. As far as the story or the plot goes, it's a little bit convoluted, but I did pick out what I thought was going to happen, and it turned out to be exactly what happened. So I definitely can't say it was a complicated story, but it's in line with just what I think you'd get in a Shaft movie. You shouldn't really be going in expecting all kinds of twists and turns and not really understanding what's going to happen. Now, the previous film I'd just seen in the movies last week was Men in Black International. I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare two films of different genres, but I would say that this film is far superior. Okay, I didn't laugh at all in Men in Black International. I laughed all the way through this film here. This film I just think is a better film than Men in Black International. So if you're going to see a film right now, I would recommend this over all of the other films available. Maybe if you really want to see something sci-fi and you really like the X-Men, go see Dark Phoenix instead of this. I didn't mind Dark Phoenix. Most people hated Dark Phoenix from what I've seen in reviews. It's bombing at the box office, but I didn't think Dark Phoenix was that bad. But I will say, just in general terms, Shaft is probably the best thing out right now to go see. Although, I've just remembered that John Wick Parabellum is still out in the movies, sort of. So, I would probably go and see John Wick Chapter 3 a second time, rather than seeing Shaft a second time. So, in theory, go see John Wick, don't see Shaft, but I did enjoy Shaft. So I think Shaft is better, probably than Dark Phoenix. It's definitely better than Men in Black International. As far as any sort of politics goes for the film, which you normally have to discuss in 2019 because everything's political, I would say that it's fairly apolitical, but that in itself makes it seem anti-social justice-y. So I'm not necessarily saying that it is an anti-social justice film, although I think you probably can say that, but because it definitely isn't pro-social justice, and I guess the old adage, if you're not with us, you're against us, it's anti-social justice. So it does have some comedy that would be something you would have seen in a film from 5 years ago or earlier when no one really had all the social justice craziness on their mind. But nowadays, it seems like it's taking a stance, again, not so much against it, but just not for it, just ignoring it, I think is the point of view that the film had. But because of that, I imagine it's probably going to face heavy criticism from the 8% or so, or whatever it is, the people that self-describe themselves as progressives or social justice warriors, if they see the film. The film is doing quite poor in the box office, so very few people have seen it. So the criticism for this, I've not really seen, probably because no one's seen the film. So there's not been people that have seen it to have a backlash, if they have a backlash against it. But I think it's there. I think if you're somebody that gets easily offended, or easily offended on behalf of someone else, this film will trigger you, to use that word. This film will annoy you. You'll hate this film. It's got a lot of stuff in it for you to be offended at if you are easily offended. I didn't think it was an offensive film. I'm not saying it's offensive, but nowadays where you kind of have to walk on eggshells not to offend everybody, this film doesn't care. And it just goes out there and does it. And again, I don't think it's necessarily doing it to stick it to social justice people or to make it overly offensive, but I think because it just doesn't care about it, people will find this to be a very offensive film. So I've had a little bit of a look at some of the reviews, not an in-depth look, but I was very interested just to see, are these reviewers offended? Are they the people getting offended on other people's behalf? Here on Metacritic, it's got a 40 from the real critics, and it's got a 6.5 from the users, and that's probably where I thought maybe it'll land. In fact, I think the 40 is a bit higher than I thought so-called critics would put this film. I thought they'd actually rank it a bit lower than that, but I did expect a bit of a gap in the benefit towards the user score than the critics, which is what you get for a lot of, I don't know what you'd say, films that don't win awards. I guess that's what you get. Films that don't win awards, they just seem to get lower scores for critics and higher scores for users. But something that's going to win an Oscar, normally it's kind of around the other way around. The critics love it and the general audience doesn't. But since I looked at Metacritic, I thought I need to check out Rotten Tomatoes. I don't like looking at Rotten Tomatoes, but I do like seeing how bad a bias it may have. And on Rotten Tomatoes, 33% to 95%, so absolutely crazy. I mean, what is the worth of critics if critics have a score so different from the people that actually see the movie? The whole point of a critic score is to let you know how good the film is so that you can go, see it with some sort of, oh, okay, you think it's good or you think it's bad. 33% to 95%, the critic score's worthless. It's absolutely worthless to have such a big gap between the people that think they'll like the movie and think they won't. Now, again, here on Rotten Tomatoes, the percents they show, this isn't the scores people are giving it. The critics aren't giving it a 33% for the quality. 33% of critics liked the film. So it's just a like or dislike on Rotten Tomatoes, whereas the audience score, 95% of people like the film. So that's what you're seeing with the percentage. It's not saying that the audience gave it an average of 95. That would be crazy. The film's not that good. I did laugh a bit, but this is not a 95 out of 100 film. But 95% of the audience here said that they liked the film. That's what that's saying. And I wonder if their little protection system they implemented is actually backfiring a little bit on them here. So you have to have a ticket that you bought through Fandango to be able to put a vote in at all now as just an audience score, which has 95% right now. And that means that if you are somebody that's outraged in theory about this movie, you can't be review bombing it. So all the social justice warriors that probably won't see this film but might hear about some of the so-called offensive things, they're also being banned from dropping this percent down from 95. So that's maybe an interesting side effect for what they try to do to cover for the other film that shall not be named. And here Shaft, I guess, is getting the benefit of the same system here because people that haven't seen the film can't put a little review in as an authenticated audience person. So lastly here, I'm just going to read through a few of the reviews on Metacritic, just the headline of the reviews, not the whole reviews themselves, just the few sentences they put up, just to see, is there any sort of outrage on behalf of other people, or what exactly are the real critics saying about the film? So the top one I've used here, this is not the top review, this is the one from the middle, has a 60. To listen to Jackson doing street talk is akin to reveling in Oliver reciting Shakespeare. In other words, it's one of the great pleasures of the language. Edit the film down to his dialogue, and you have a wonderful greatest hits collection. I would agree with that, and Todd McCarthy, this is who's actually written this here, I think it's probably not safe for him to go out in public. He may get a milkshake thrown at him or whatever the crazies is doing to people nowadays. He'll be called a Nazi probably for saying that actual review. I would agree with that. That is really the highlight, is all the dialogue from Samuel Jackson in the movie. The next one here has a 58. Despite its sometimes questionable jokes, provocative culture trolling, and a shaky plot, Shaft isn't either a full-on misfire or blaxploitation rejuvenation. Instead, Shaft is a descent, if slightly tepid, action comedy anchored by a hilarious performance by Samuel L. Jackson. Yep, I completely agree with that one. The next one, I've just read the first couple of words and I'm laughing. How jokes this offensive can make it to the screen in 2019 is beyond comprehension. This is exactly what I thought people would be saying. It's beyond comprehension and a bit of a shame, considering that this has so much else going for it, including a delightful late-game appearance by the original Shaft, Richard Roundtree, who looks fantastic, by the way. Well, I don't know what else this person expected in the movie, particularly if they liked the original Shaft from like 1971 to be in the movie. But this is exactly what I thought they'd say. The next one's got What we have here is a standard issue comedy tinged crime thriller, indifferently directed by Tim Story. It's nothing special plot. The product of writers features an ill-defined villains and briefly touches on Islamophobia and military veteran PTSD and drug abuse. I guess it does, and never follows up on any of those issues. Well, I mean, if you wanted it to, you want it to address Islamophobia, come on. What kind of movie are you going to here? So I don't think that's fair criticism. Yes, it's sort of raised a little bit, but I think it's a bit unrealistic to go into Shaft and expect an addressing of Islamophobia. I don't know what kind of movie they think they're going into. Okay, and the last kind of neutral-ish review here, orangey or yellow review. I appreciate the direction they wanted to take this, but the jokes needed work. The ridicule should be more directed at Jackson's character's various blind spots and intolerances. This is my Puerto Rican I don't trust file and disrespect for human rights. Again, what's it? Roger Moore, what a disgrace. This person's a shame on the name Roger Moore. Hopefully it's not Roger Moore 007. He might be dead, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's a different Roger Moore. But yeah, what you expecting to have the film talk about disrespect for human rights? Come on, it's crazy. So let's see some of the red ones here. Who's really offended here? I got a 35 here from IGN. Tim Story takes a classic movie franchise, drains it of all the action, sex, and topicality that made it worth revisiting in the first place. Jackson, Roundtree, and Usher have star power to spare, but they're asked to perform embarrassing and ignorant comedy routines, and the action is so unremarkable the movie can't even rely on that spectacle to compensate. I would semi-agree with the action. The action's there. It sort of moves the plot along. I wouldn't call this an action movie. There's shooting in it. People get shot. People get killed. But again, that's why I kind of looked on IMDb just to see what they're even calling this genre, because I don't think it should be called a comedy. I don't think it should be called an action. It has comedy in it, and I laughed. It has some action in it. But again, calling it an action comedy, I don't know. Thriller maybe what you should call it, but it's not got a plot you could call a thriller plot. So I'm not really sure what the genre is here at this movie. And the next one here has a 25. Ultimately, the only truly retro thing about this weirdly reactionary potboiler is its politics. Well, there we go. I don't think it addressed any politics, but that, for some people, is offensive enough. You have to have social justice in the film, or else your politics are retro. Next one here has a 20. Even outside of the script's aggressively repetitive bigotry, the shambolic Scooby-Doo plot... What? Shambolic Scooby-Doo plot struggles to grab even the slightest amount of attention. The plot has nothing special to it. I'm not going to disagree the plot's nothing special. I didn't think it would have anything special, but calling it aggressively bigoted... Yeah. 12, oh my. The plot is completely forgettable. Yeah, okay. And Story's direction is Story's the director here, and the director's direction is atrocious here. He can't balance the numerous attempts at unfunny comedy with the sudden outbursts of extreme gunplay. What? The action sequences lack any sense of excitement, and only once do the stars of comedy and action align. I don't think that's necessarily unfair. I disagree with I thought it was very funny. But, yeah, the action's nothing special in the film. I didn't think the action would be anything special, but it's true, the action doesn't really bring it up a notch. Alright, the last one here, the worst review on Metacritic's got a 10. It's so aggressively puerile and phallocentric. It could be taken as a parody of a puerile phallocentric action comedy, a hot foot to feminists and girly men. That's a distinction without a difference, though, since either way it stinks to heaven. Oh... So all in all there, a little bit of offence from the critics. The critics aren't too happy, but they didn't sound as offended as I thought they would have been. So, yeah, they said it's bigoted and they said it was ignorant and whatever other words they were using. But I thought the film was funny. If you like Samuel Jackson, you like the film. That's really the bottom line. Shaft 2019. Check it out. Don't see Men in Black International. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.